Keep yourself in the loop of everything football on the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. The latest news on and off the field, be it college football, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC to the NFL. We've got you covered. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
Thank you for tuning into the GSMC Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kendrick. I hope you're all having a fantastic day. It is wonderful. I am very, very excited for the simple fact that sports is starting to come back. The NFLPA and the NFL have come to a full-on agreement and everything. They've signed off on everything that needs to be signed off on, and sports is going to fully be back. The NBA has already returned. The MLB has already returned. The products are interesting to say the least. I think the NBA's is better than the MLB simply because the NBA is able to hide the fact that there isn't exactly a crowd there. They've kind of put players around in a different seating arrangement so that there's kind of a crowd, but nonetheless it is still a bit interesting. In the MLB, there's certain shots that look better than others, but once there's a wide shot and you can see how empty the stands are, it just looks a bit different. Obviously with the sound, they're pumping in sound, pumping in cheering, pumping in boos, whatever it might be, which is also, again, very interesting to say the least. But nonetheless, it's exciting to see. And I cannot wait to see how the NFL does. I can't wait to see how the product there looks. And I just really, really hope that the NFL can actually go forward with a season. Nonetheless, we got a lot of stuff to get into today. Alex Smith has been medically cleared to now return to football activities. I want to talk about that. I got some thoughts about all of that. I want to get into which second-year quarterback I believe is going to be poised for the big second-year explosion, and then which second-year quarterback I believe is poised for the sophomore slump. Seattle made a trade for Jamal Adams, and Jamal Adams also spoke out on the Jets and the head coach. I want to get into that. And then stay tuned. My final topic of the day, I want to get into my top 10 NFL head coaches currently in the league. This is not going to be a thing of an all-time list, nothing like that. I was not alive that long, so I can't go back that far. I have to do a lot more research, but I'm going based off of the current NFL coaches as it stands right now in my mind. Nonetheless, so we're all humans, and we all have to make very, very tough decisions in our lives. When we're little, that's something that our parents do for us. Our parents make a lot of the decisions for us, and I feel like we probably take advantage of that, and we do not appreciate what being a little naive kid really does for us. Because then the older we get, once we start getting involved with relationships, and we're really trying to figure out our friend group, career-wise, job-wise, education-wise, family-wise, whatever it is, we have to make some very, very tough decisions. And sometimes the decision that might be the best for you might not be the best for everybody else. And then you kind of have to weigh, is that the right thing for you to do? It betters you, but it hurts some other people. Or maybe you do something, people are saying, you should do this for us, but you know it's going to hurt you if you do it for the other people, right? You gotta weigh all these different things. And some people are really, really good at handling big decisions like that. Some people are not. For me personally, I'm someone who can get really, really bad anxiety when it comes to making a huge decision, especially if I look at it from both sides and I can see the pros and cons from both sides, and they just kind of weigh evenly. Because then I'm sitting there and I'm like, I don't see a really big glaring yes I should do this or no I shouldn't do that. You know, it can be a real challenge. At least for me. And I know that for other people, there's some people, I've had some friends in my life who literally need someone else to make the decision for them because they will sit there and ponder it forever and they will never come to a decision on it, and they'll just sit there until like the opportunity is gone. because they'll let that opportunity basically have made the choice for them. So, Laurent Duvernay-Tardif is one of the starting offensive linemen for the Chiefs, one of their starting guards. You could say that after Mitchell Schwartz, their all-pro tackle, you could say he is their second most consistent offensive lineman. He was scheduled to make $2.75 million this season, and he is now going to make $150,000 because he has opted out of playing this season. For those of you who do not know, not only is he their starting right guard, but he also has a doctorate in medicine. Let me repeat that. He's a starting offensive lineman in the NFL. In his spare time, in the off season, whenever he could make time to, he continued his education and he got a doctorate in medicine. This is a very, very smart man, and his reasons for why it is that he essentially opted out for this season had to do not only with the coronavirus, but also his own conscience, I guess you could say. I'll read part of his statement that he released a couple days ago when he talked about this. So he said, "This is one of the most difficult decisions I have had to make in my life, but I must follow my convictions and do what I believe is right for me personally. That is why I have decided to take the opt-out option negotiated by the league and the NFLPA and officially opt out of the 2020 NFL season. Being at the front line during this offseason has given me a different perspective on this pandemic and the stress it puts on individuals and our healthcare system. I cannot allow myself to potentially transmit the virus in our communities simply to play the sport I love. If I am to take risks, I will do it caring for patients." Every single year, the NFL gives out the Walter Payton Man of the Year Award, and I think that if anybody deserves the Walter Payton Man of the Year Award, it is Laurent Duvernay-Tardif. That what he's doing is incredible. He isn't just opting out of this season to go sit at home and relax and not get the virus, not put his family at risk. That's not what he's doing. He still is going to be putting himself at risk, right? There are doctors, there are other nurses who have gotten COVID working with patients. He is still putting himself at risk, but if he's going to put himself at risk, he's going to do it caring for the sick. That is an amazing thing. If there's anything that embodies Walter Payton Man of the Year, it is what Laurent Duvernay-Tardif did. And I'm going to continue to say his full name. I think everyone should know this man's name. He's not a star. He's not even, he's not a superstar. He's not a star. I'm sure he could walk down the street anywhere. No one would really know who he is. You just see a really, really big man. And maybe assume he played basketball or the NFL, whatever it might be. But everyone should know this man's name. What he's doing is amazing. And he had to make a very, very tough decision. And not many people are put in a position like that, right? Not many people are put in that exact position where it's like, oh, do you do your job or do you opt out and follow a different, do something else that you're passionate about, which for him it is medicine. Everyone has to make a difficult decision. And with that being said, Alex Smith, who has been medically cleared to resume football activities, should retire. And when he was traded to Washington, he had got a 4-year, $94 million extension with like $55 million at signing. So he got a really, really good contract and everything from them. But the reason why it is that he was traded there was because the Chiefs had drafted Patrick Mahomes. And even though Alex Smith had one of his best seasons that year with the Chiefs, he looked like he'd kind of gotten over his captain check down thing. He was actually throwing the ball down the field. I think he tied his career high for yards per attempt in his career, but nonetheless, they moved on from him. He was a great teacher to Patrick Mahomes. They sent him to Washington, who was in desperate need of a quarterback because they had lost Kirk Cousins, and that first season with Washington, it seemed like it was going to go pretty good for him. He was 6-3. He was kind of putting up, regular Alex Smith numbers, but the thing is that Washington just looked so much better because Alex Smith is a grown-up, has been a grown-up throughout his career. If there's anything that you can say about Alex Smith, has he been the best quarterback? No. But is he a professional and a true grown-up? Yes. Because he got shipped out of San Francisco because of Kaepernick. And he was a great teacher to Kaepernick. He got shipped out of Kansas City. He was a great teacher to Patrick Mahomes. And now with Washington, from by all accounts, he has been very, very helpful in the quarterback room when he's been around. But I just don't know if he's going to be a starter again. But he was playing good football with Washington, and then they faced the Texans, and he broke his leg when he got sacked by J.J. Watt and Kareem Jackson, I believe. And it was the same exact leg break that Joe Theismann suffered. There were so many parallels to it. I think the score of the game ended the same as Joe Theismann's did. They were, he was the quarterback of Washington. Theismann was the quarterback of Washington. It kind of happened in the same fashion. It was ridiculous. It happened on the same day. Like, I don't remember how many years it was, 30 plus years to the date that he had broken his leg. I mean, there were just so many parallels. It was crazy to see. But Alex Smith should seriously consider retiring. If you remember, he was drafted in 2005. He hasn't played 16 games that many times in his career. He has missed, there are seasons where he might have just played 15. There have been seasons where he's played 11, where he's played 10, where he's missed an entire season. He has been injury prone just throughout his career. And he's 36. You're asking him to play at a position that is at the most competitive it has ever been in the NFL. With the fact that every single team at this point has kind of somewhat found their starter, while there's some teams I do believe that could look to upgrade and that could look to move on from guys just either from age or because they're just not exactly sure they're the guy. Every team somewhat has their quarterback. You're asking him to come in and compete again, coming off of probably 2 years in which he won't play any football. And by that point, he'll be 37? I just don't know what the point is. Don't get me wrong. I think if he was to see the field, if he was to even complete a single pass, I think that is just incredible that he was able to do that. Because his leg break, it wasn't just that his leg was broken. He almost lost his leg because of a serious life-threatening infection that his leg got. They almost had to amputate it, which I think would have just been heartbreaking. But they were able to save it, recovered, and since then he has just been rehabbing, trying to get his leg back right. Because he said he wants to play. He doesn't want to leave, he doesn't want that moment to be the last moment of his career, him being carted off and everything. And I get that. But man, I just don't know if it's worth it. I really don't know if it's worth it. He's a guy who's already made his money in the NFL. Obviously he had his extension with Washington. It was the $94 million. I think it was 70 fully guaranteed. There was the $55 million at signing bonus. In his entire career, he has made north of $161 million. People have to remember, he was a number 1 overall pick coming out of college. And of course, hindsight is 2020. He should not have been the number 1 overall pick. It should have been Aaron Rodgers, but it is what it is. He was taken. He got a gigantic payday from that, because I think that was also back when number 1 overall picks still got gigantic money. So, he's made his money. He is not some guy who's only gotten 1 contract in his career, and it was a meh kind of contract. He has made good money. And I think he should seriously consider the fact that this guy, throughout his career, hasn't always been, you can't write him in to finish 16 games, right? There's very few quarterbacks in the NFL where you could consistently write them in. They are going to finish 16 games. Well, maybe not few. But, guys like Russell Wilson, you could say, oh yeah, no, he's going to play 16 games. Tom Brady, yeah, no, he's going to play 16 games. You know who wasn't set to always play 16 games? Guys like Ben Roethlisberger. You couldn't guarantee he was going to be able to make it through the season. Andrew Luck. You just weren't sure he was going to be able to make it through the season because he was battling some injuries throughout his career as well, and that's ultimately what has made him retire. Alex Smith is another guy. You just weren't sure he was going to be able to finish the season all the way out. Maybe he was going to play 15 games. Maybe he played 14. There have been times where he's played 10, where he's played 11, times where he has played no games. To actually give you guys how many games that he has played per season, all right? So his rookie year, he started 7, but he played 9. So that was just kind of the weird thing. But after that, it's 16, 7, 0. He started 10, played in 11, started 10, played in 11, 16, started 9, played in 10, 15, 15, 16, 15, 15, and then 10 with Washington. So, I mean, this guy, he's been injury prone just throughout his career, man. I don't know if it's worth it. Now, let's just say he was to retire. How do I think people would look back on him? I think people would look back on him and say that he was a up and down quarterback who wasn't really a refined passer, but was decent, that he was a really, really good dual threat. He kept your defense honest. He didn't really like to push the ball down, but he was an efficient kind of passer. He was like the ultimate game manager. He did win a lot of games. He was 93, 66, and 1 in the regular season. When he actually did get on the field, there were just a lot of games he didn't get to play. He was a 3-time Pro Bowler. I think he led the league in passer rating one time. He was 2-5 in the postseason, so not the best. His play did significantly decline in the postseason, especially his completion percentage. I believe his completion percentage is like 52%, I think, in the postseason. I might have that stat a bit wrong. I might have been looking at a season in which he had that. But his play just overall significantly dropped, and his record kind of shows for it. He wasn't a winner in the postseason, 2-5. But I think people are always going to know him, especially in the NFL circles, of that this dude was a professional. It is well documented that when Aaron Rodgers went to Green Bay, that Brett Favre was not happy. And that Brett Favre was not really a teacher to him. Now, there's differentiating stories. There's some people who say that Favre and Rodgers got along, and there's those who say that, oh yeah, Favre, no, he did kind of teach him, but then there's those who say, no, they didn't get along, and they were not friends. And up until recently, they still weren't really friends. But with Alex Smith, the Niners, they drafted Kaepernick. When Kaepernick took over as the starter, and then even when Alex Smith came back and was healthy, and they told him, no, we're going to ride with Kaepernick. Alex Smith, I don't remember seeing anything about him complaining in the news. By all accounts, he was a great teacher to Kaepernick. He goes to Kansas City. He's there while he's winning games with the Chiefs. They weren't really having any postseason success. In fact, there were some absolute meltdowns at the hands of Alex Smith. And, of course, some people can say it's Andy Reid, but Alex Smith is the quarterback of the team. And they draft Mahomes. He knows it's his last season in Kansas City, and even though he has one of his best years in the NFL in general, not just as a Chief, he still took Patrick Mahomes under his wing and showed him how he trains, how to be a professional in the league. He goes to Washington, even after he gets hurt. When he has been in the building, he's been a great mentor. He's been a great teacher. He is always looking to help out. He's going to go down, even though I do not believe Alex Smith will get any Hall of Fame votes. I think it would be asinine to put him in the Hall of Fame. He can be in the Hall of Average, but when it comes to just being a person, he's in the Hall of Fame for that. For being a professional, he is in the Hall of Fame for that. Tardif had to make a very tough decision to opt out of this coming NFL season. Alex Smith, I think, needs to make a very tough decision on should this be the end of his career. I think that people looking back on him, especially his time in Washington, they will say he had Washington in a really good spot before his injury. 6-3. He had them in a really good spot. And then just sadly, it didn't end well. That he just had a tragic injury. I don't think anyone's going to hold him against that. I know that that's probably not what he wants his last moment to be. But he's played 16 games 3 times in his career since 2005. You gotta sit it out, man. You gotta sit it out. You know, I just don't think it's worth it. I think you're at an age, I think Alex Smith is at an age, I think he's made enough money in his career, over $160 million just in his NFL contracts. I think he's at an age and at a point in his life and with his injury history where he needs to seriously prioritize his own health because he does have a family. I think he just needs to prioritize his own health. I know the fire in you is probably still burning to get out there and play. I understand that. Maybe try and be a coach or something like that. I'm sure that Alex Smith is a smart man. I'm sure he could really help out a quarterback room. But playing-wise, you got to prioritize your own health sometimes. I think that Alex Smith is going to have to make a very, very tough decision like Duvernay Tardif. Anyways, coming up next, we're going to get into which second-year quarterback I believe is going to be poised for a second-year explosion and which second-year quarterback I believe is going to be poised for a second-year setback. Which one is going to suffer the sophomore slump? That coming up next.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we talked about Alex Smith being medically cleared for a return to NFL activities and about how I just simply do not believe he should do so. I believe that he should strongly consider retiring for his own betterment so that he can have a long and happy life with his family. Not a long and healthy and happy life with his family. Nonetheless, so before we get into the second-year quarterbacks thing, so Washington has rebranded itself as the Washington Football Team temporarily. They're going to make a decision on a final name at a later date, but for the time being, they will be known as the Washington Football Team. So a lot of people, of course, are ripping on them. A lot of people are sitting here thinking to themselves, that's all they came up with? They came up with the Washington Football Team? How serious are they trying to be? What does this even mean? Well, also, I think it was announced even on the same day, Seattle's NHL team that it was gifted over an NBA team, that's funny, was named the Seattle Kraken. And there's a lot of people who think that name is ridiculous, and there's those who think that the name is cool. I don't really have a problem with it. I'm not really a fan of the NHL, so it doesn't necessarily matter to me. But the thing with that name decision, it took them damn near 2 years to come up with that name. And they searched over 1,000 names to figure out what it is that they wanted to actually name their team. And so after 1,000 names, after like 20 some months of trying to figure out what they wanted to name it, they finally settled on the Seattle Kraken. So I think that if it takes an NHL team damn near 2 years to decide on the name, then I think that we can give Washington a football season or a football season and a half, whatever it takes. I think we can give them a year to come up with a name for their team. I think that trying to make them figure it out in the span of 2-3 months, I just think is unrealistic. It's great that they acknowledge the problem. It's great that Dan Schneider decided to basically renege on his old quotes in which he said that he would never change the name, and that they are changing it. And I think it's cool that they went ahead and decided to go into the season just being called the Washington Football Team. Let's not have that name anymore. Let's go ahead and get people used to not having that be our name, and then we'll go ahead and decide on something at a later date. Anyways, so the last few seasons, there has been a second-year quarterback that has exploded and that has ended up even coming close to winning the MVP. So obviously I'm talking about Carson Wentz in his second year, exploded, was the leading candidate for MVP until he got hurt, and then they gave it to Tom Brady, which I thought was ridiculous, but whatever. I thought Carson Wentz still deserved it because of his play throughout that season, but nonetheless, he didn't win it, but he was the leading candidate throughout the season. And then after that, Patrick Mahomes had his amazing second year in which he threw 5,000 yards and 50 touchdowns, and he won the MVP. Lamar Jackson came off of his second year, exploded, won the MVP, although his playoff performance wasn't really that great. His regular season was sensational. It was the Michael Vick experience 2.0. It was just fantastic. And Lamar is looking to build off of that season in his third year. So if we kind of were to continue with this trend, then obviously there has to be another second-year quarterback that explodes. And there have been other second-year quarterbacks that have put up big numbers, right? I think Blake Bortles in his second year had his probably his best year, from a play standpoint. I think he threw 35 touchdowns that season, and even though I think he also had like 18 interceptions, he had his highest passing yard total. He had his most passing touchdowns. If you want to go to someone like Jared Goff in his second year, he looked better than he did his first year. So sometimes it's even just the play ticks up. But I'm talking about which second-year quarterback do I believe could end up being like the MVP. So obviously the team has to be good. They got to be in the playoffs. They got to be a double-digit win team. Which teams do I think this could be? And then which quarterback do I believe could end up having that sophomore slump where their record and their play could actually go down as compared to what it was? So for my quarterback that I believe could be in this position, it is not Kyler Murray. I think it would be Drew Lock. And here is my stance on that. So Drew Lock, he finished the season with a 57.6 grade. So not great. He threw the ball 156 times for 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns, 3 picks. It was nothing spectacular. He's not really a mobile dude, so he's not going to terrify you with his legs. He is a bit more of an old school quarterback. Can he move a bit? Yes, he can. He's young. He's got fresh legs. But he is not a Lamar Jackson athlete. He's not Russell Wilson. He's not Kyler Murray. But even with that being said, I believe he would be in one of the better positions because the team did kind of finish on a high note, you could say. They went 4-1. Now, they didn't necessarily beat anybody spectacular. They did beat the Texans. But then again, there's people who also believe Bill O'Brien is just the worst coach in the NFL and does nothing but hold Deshaun Watson back. So I don't know how much credit you're gonna give to that. But they lost to the Chiefs. They beat the Chargers. They beat the Raiders. And I think they beat the Lions. So it wasn't necessarily like he went out there and beat Russell Wilson or beat Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson or anybody like that, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady. He didn't do that. But he did go 4-1 down the stretch, put up decent numbers. But I look at the team as a whole, right? Because this is about the team. You can put up all the numbers you want in the NFL. If your team isn't good, you're not going to win anything. And would I necessarily put money on Drew Lock being the MVP or being an MVP candidate? No, I wouldn't. I really wouldn't, because I just don't think that's a safe bet, especially even as a younger quarterback. I think that in your second year, especially when you are now the full-time starter, because this last season, you have to remember, he was not the starter. He wasn't set to start anything. I think the only reason he did start at all was because Joe Flacco got hurt. And they eventually ended up throwing him into the fire. And I guess you could say he did kind of succeed. He managed it well. His teammates really seemed to like him. But yeah, take a look at the whole team. Denver's defense was still 10th in the league. Now, they did lose Chris Harris Jr., and I think that's a big blow. But their head coach, Vic Fangio, is a defensive-minded guy. And although the league is moving towards offense, he has shown that obviously he can get Denver's defense still right. We'll see how it performs without Chris Harris Jr., but he knows a thing or two about defense. The defense was still top 10. You would assume they didn't lose too many significant pieces on it, other than Chris Harris Jr. They kept Simmons on the franchise tag, so they got some other good players on it. Their linebacking core, I think, did better than expected. They will get their pass rusher. They'll get Chubb back, Bradley Chubb. They still got Von Miller. They still have some other pieces there. So I think the defense will stay intact. Their offensive line is ranked 14th. A lot of people give their offensive line crap, and especially their left tackle, Garrett Bowles. Garrett Bowles has not been spectacular in the NFL, but he has been solid. He is kind of a penalty machine, but he has been a solid player. They drafted Judy, which was huge for this team. He was regarded as either the first or second best receiver in the draft. They have Cortland Sutton, who is a big-bodied receiver who can go up and win the 50-50 balls and just overpower DBs because of his size. They have a good running back stable. They still got Phillip Lindsay. They signed Melvin Gordon, who knows a thing or two about the Chargers. Maybe he'll let them in on a little secret here or there. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But I simply believe that Denver has the pieces. They have a young tight end. See how that all goes. I just believe that Denver is in the best position amongst all the other second-year quarterbacks to really help Drew Lock not only give him good pieces to throw to and to work with and good protection, but to also have the chance to have a good record. This team was in so many one-score games. They led in multiple games last season, entering the fourth quarter, that they then just lost. And that was with Joe Flacco playing. This team was competitive all season long. They just had some bad luck. You would assume, given the turnover ratio, that is going to change the next season, right? Those games that you lost that were one-score games, you might end up winning those games the coming season. But again, I think there is something also to say, I believe, for there not being too much film on Drew Lock. You got 5 starts. How much do you really learn about a quarterback in that amount of games? I don't know. But I think, part of the reason why Lamar Jackson had the success he did is because there wasn't too much film on him. The reason why Patrick Mahomes had the success he did, there wasn't too much film on him. I think there's something to say for the fact he only has played in 5 NFL games. Has the whole playbook been unleashed? Have people seen everything he can do? I don't know. I would maybe assume not. But I think that just given Denver's pieces, where they were this last season, what they added to the team compared to what they lost, I believe that this team could be poised to be a double-digit win team. And if Drew Lock plays well, that he could end up being that second-year quarterback that explodes. For Kyler Murray, their defense is just too bad. Their defense is in the bottom 5 of defenses. Their offensive line is ranked in the 20th by Pro Football Focus, and Kyler Murray runs himself into a lot of pressures. He and Deshaun Watson, I think, were among the league leaders in running themselves into sacks and into pressures. Even though they gave him DeAndre Hopkins and he has some good offensive weapons, I just don't think the record's going to be good enough. So even though Kyler Murray might perform well, I just think it will get overshadowed by their record. Now, as for the quarterback, I believe that's going to have the sophomore slump. I believe that the quarterback that has the best chance to suffer it, and I believe will suffer it, will be Daniel Jones. Now, he graded last season with a 65.7, so his grade was almost 10 points higher than even Drew Lock's. He very much outperformed Drew Lock. And he did that while beating a lot of his doubters, because a lot of people looked at the Giants drafting him and said, why would you draft a quarterback out of Duke? Why would you do that? Duke is a basketball school. what is so special about Drew Lock? None of his college numbers are impressive. There is nothing about his college numbers that scream first-round pick. But the thing that a lot of coaches were saying was that he played in a pro-style system. You know, his quarterback was Cutcliffe, coached the Mannings, and so they have those family ties, and that they believe in Drew Lock. Well, he went out there and he basically proved his doubters wrong. He showed he can play in the NFL. Now, the thing that does scare you about Daniel Jones is that his turnover rate and his fumbles, specifically his fumbles, are ridiculous. So, during the season, he threw, I think, 24 touchdowns to 12 interceptions. Those numbers sound pretty good. And then you look at his fumbles, and you see he fumbled 18 times. He didn't even start all 16 games. He fumbled more times than games he played. Than games even in a season. He lost 11 of those fumbles. So altogether, 24 touchdowns, 23 turnovers. Not great. I think that the other things that could really end up hurting Daniel Jones is the fact that his offensive line is ranked 20th in the league, so it's not a great offensive line. He has his turnover problem, but the thing that I believe that is going to affect more than even just the young quarterbacks. I've said this for any quarterback in the league that has a new head coach, a new offensive scheme, I think is going to struggle this season. I've said it for the Cowboys. I think if the Cowboys, if they had Jason Garrett still, they'd be in a pretty damn good position for this upcoming season. But given the fact that they have a new head coach who is most likely going to take over a lot of the play calling, even though they kept Kellen Moore. Given COVID, the fact that there is limited OTAs, limited training camp, there's not a whole lot of time to practice and get familiar with a new system if it is there, that's going to hurt. Daniel Jones, he gets a new head coach in his second season after performing relatively well under Pat Shurmur. The problem was just that Pat Shurmur has done nothing for the Giants. I don't know if Pat Shurmur will ever become a head coach again. I think he might be relegated to being an offensive coordinator, which he actually showed, though. He's a pretty good offensive coordinator. He should probably stick to that area and not try and be a head coach. But you give him this new head coach, Joe Judge, who was a special teams coordinator, has never ever been a head coach before in his life, and there's a lot of people who think that that was just the strangest hire by the Giants. There were so many other possible candidates they could have gone for, and they went for this special teams coach from New England. So, I mean, we'll see how that works. But I mean, you take a look at like Baker Mayfield. What has been the problem for Baker Mayfield? He's already on his fourth head coach. He has had zero stability. Whether it comes to offensive coordinator, head coach, doesn't matter. His offensive line, first season it was good, second season it was bad. This season now, we're assuming again it's going to be good. When he has a good offensive line, we saw. Pro Football Focus graded him as a top 10 quarterback. As soon as his offensive line, especially at the tackle positions, fell apart, the team did not look good, and Baker Mayfield did not look good. When his time was limited, he was terrible. He was forcing the football. I think there's a lot of blame also, though, with Freddie Kitchens. He did not really help him with play calling when it came to the offensive line, but nonetheless, it is what it is. He's with a new head coach now, better tackles. We'll see how it works. Daniel Jones, not only are you giving him not only does he already have a bottom of the half of the league offensive line, and the offensive line with the Giants has been bad for quite a while, even though there's some interesting players on it that you hope can grow into something more. It hasn't been good, and you're giving him a new head coach that's not even an offensive guy. He's a special teams guy. There's only one other head coach in the NFL, I believe, off the top of my head. There's only one other NFL coach in the league right now that was a special teams coordinator before becoming a head coach, and that's John Harbaugh. And obviously Harbaugh has shown that he is just an all-around good head coach. His teams are always competitive, they're always good, his special teams especially are always top half of the league, and the Patriots special teams was always also a top half of the league as well. So maybe the Giants special teams will be really good, but I don't know about the rest of it. Jones, his rookie year, he proved a lot of doubters wrong. He showed everybody that the Giants were correct in drafting him. He looked better than Eli Manning had in the last few seasons. He showed he could move. He gave them an element to their offense that they didn't have at all with Eli, which was that he could run. His Tampa Bay game in particular really stands out to me because he had a key run towards the end of that game to put the Giants ahead. And just overall, he looked pretty damn decent for a guy who a lot of people thought would just be a flat-out bust. But now the question is, what's he going to look like this second year with this new head coach? Well, the general manager is the same. Gettleman, he is still there, so you could say that the regime, he is safe. Like, it's not like they're going to all of a sudden go draft another guy if this season doesn't work out well. Because the thing for Baker is that they have a new GM and a new head coach. They could definitely ship Baker out, and there'd be almost no problem. But with Daniel Jones, while he might not get shipped out, I would not be surprised if the Giants' record was even worse than it was last season, and that Daniel Jones' numbers just kind of plummet. I wouldn't be surprised if his touchdowns went down, and if his interceptions went up, or his fumbles went up. Teams know what you gotta do. Go for his hands. If you're gonna go for the sack, go for his hands. Knock that ball out of his hands. He will drop it. And I think that there are gonna be teams that are gonna take advantage of that. You got a whole year of film under him, essentially a whole year of film. Limited training camp, limited OTAs. I just don't know if it's going to go well for Daniel Jones. Anyways, coming up next, we're going to get into Seattle trading for Jamal Adams. Jamal Adams, he spoke out a bit on the Jets. Some players were reacting to the Jamal Adams trade. I want to get into some of that. And stay tuned, my final topic of the day. I'm going to get into my top 10 NFL head coaches currently in the NFL. That later. Stay tuned.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment I gave you guys which sophomore quarterback I believe is poised to have the big jump in year two, such as a Carson Wentz in his year two, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, which one is poised to have maybe the possible MVP run, and which quarterback I believe is going to suffer the sophomore slump. One quarterback I did neglect to mention is Gardner Minshew. He actually graded the best by Pro Football Focus among all rookie quarterbacks last season. The problem for him is that I just think Jacksonville is going to be a firestorm. I think there's a great chance they could fire their coach after this season. I don't see any reason as to why it is that they would keep him. I like Gardner Minshew. I actually thought that dude, I think he can play. I just don't think he's in a good situation in Jacksonville, even though they do have, they have some good pieces on the offensive line. They've got some interesting wide receivers to choose from. Their running back situation, I don't know, with Leonard Fournette isn't necessarily the best. He's kind of a throwback running back, not much of a pass catcher. But even though I think that Gardner Minshew could have a fine season, I just don't think that their record will be where it needs to be to actually really consider Gardner Minshew for anything. And I think there's a great chance that they could still end up looking for another quarterback, even though Minshew seems like he has some upside. But anyways, so Seattle on Saturday kind of shocked the world when they made a trade for Jamal Adams. Now, when Jamal Adams had originally first been kind of announced that he wanted to trade, there were a list of teams that were named that could possibly want to grab him. I know that the 49ers were on the list, and I think Seattle was on the list as well. There were a few teams that were named as places that would be a really good fit for Jamal Adams, and he wanted out of the Jets. He doesn't like playing there. He posted a couple of tweets where he excoriated the head coach Adam Gase, who even in Miami rubbed people the wrong way. He's seen as a guy who was much more about his money and has a very high ego. His ego can easily be hurt. I think Jamal Adams said, he wouldn't address the whole team if there was a problem. He would leave that up to another coach. He doesn't really try to form relationships with his players. I remember I saw a clip of he and Sam Darnold arguing on the sideline, and it just didn't look good. The optics of it didn't look good, especially when you then consider Adam Gase's reputation. Now, by all accounts, as an offensive mind, he is seen as one of the top dudes in the NFL, but maybe from an actual coaching standpoint, he's not the guy. Probably best served as an offensive coordinator. But nonetheless, Seattle, as I mentioned, maybe in my last podcast, maybe in the podcast before, that Seattle's defense is not looking good. This last season especially, I think this last season, since they drafted Russell Wilson, it is the worst it had been. It was ranked like 22nd in the NFL. And coming into this season, they have the 32nd ranked defensive line. And then even secondary-wise, it was all up in arms. You kind of looked at what pieces they could possibly have prior to Jamal Adams, and it was Bradley McDougald, Shaquille Griffin, who has some upside, but he's in the final year of his deal, coming off of his best year. Quentin Dunbar, if he can actually play, because even that is that's kind of up in the air. Trey Flowers, who's another corner of theirs, who has his spots where he seems good, but other than that, he's kind of average to below average. Obviously they still have the linebackers. Wagner's there, KJ Wright's there. Michael Kendrick, I think now is a free agent, but. And they didn't re-sign Clowney. Clowney is still a free agent. We're all still kind of waiting to see what on earth is going to happen with that. But all of a sudden, Seattle went ahead and basically the bombshell was dropped that they have made a trade for Jamal Adams. And what they did is they traded away their first round pick for this year. They traded away their first round pick for the next year and a third round pick for this year, I believe, and Bradley McDougald in exchange for Jamal Adams. Now, I think you could say in the short term, you could probably say that Seattle won it because they obviously got the great player. You would rather take an established player over a draft pick because there's always the chance that draft pick could bust. You don't know who you're going to draft. And you don't know if that player can play. We all know that Jamal Adams can play. So in the short term, Seattle has won the trade. In the long term, there is a great chance that the Jets could win the trade. Now, Bradley McDougald, he's a solid safety. This last season, he really struggled in coverage, and that is something that Jamal Adams does not struggle in. I'll get into some of that in a second here. But I think that the return that the Jets got in Bradley McDougald, I think was solid, along with the draft picks. Bradley McDougald can start. He is a solid safety. That you can do better than him, you can do worse than him. I do believe that he will most likely start for the Jets alongside Marcus May, who was drafted in the same draft class as Jamal Adams. Like the Jets, they drafted two really good safeties in the same draft, and they got Adams in the first round and then Marcus May, I think, in like the third round. So, I mean, they nailed that draft. And, now you just kind of wait and see what exactly are they going to do with these upcoming draft picks they have. As a person who's grown up in Washington his entire life and who has watched Seattle and has been rooting for the Seahawks, look, I don't make too big of a deal of the fact that they traded away 2 first-round picks, because I also just sit here and say, was Seattle even going to use them? Probably not. And even if they were going to use them, can we just look at their last set of first-round picks? It was Rashad Penny, a running back, and L.J. Collier, who I think recorded 3 tackles his entire rookie season. So, And then even then, we all know, Seattle fans know, Seattle typically likes to trade out of the first round. They would rather get a bunch of mid-round picks than keep the first rounder. So let's not make a big fuss over this like the Jets completely and utterly fleeced Seattle when Seattle was most likely going to have first round picks in the 20s, in the late 20s especially, and they weren't going to use them probably anyways. So I mean, I'm okay with that, right? Get Jamal Adams. Now, I will have a problem with it if they don't re-sign him, right? They made the trade for Jadeveon Clowney a year ago, and they haven't re-signed him. Now, part of it's because Jadeveon Clowney wants so much money, and I just don't think he's worth it. He's a great player. The problem is his health has always been a question, and even when he's on the field, the sack numbers aren't necessarily there. His pressures and getting to the quarterback and hitting the quarterback is there, but the sacks aren't necessarily there. And in order to be some $20 million a year guy, you gotta have those kind of numbers, especially if you are an edge rusher. So you can say that the Texans kind of won that battle. They kind of won that trade because Seattle doesn't even have Clowney anymore. He's still a free agent. But then when it comes to Jamal Adams, I believe, if I'm mistaken, I could be mistaken, I do believe they should have him for the next 2 years. I believe they should have him for his 4th year and his 5th year option, because I do believe the Jets exercised it. But they're gonna need to make him the highest paid safety. And when you look at Jamal Adams for his actual, let's just go with his career grades, right? So starting from his rookie year up to this last year, he was a 68.5. I think that was ranked in like the 40s for safeties. And then he had an 89.8 and an 87.9. His overall career grade is a 90. When you look at this last season, his overall grade, along with his coverage grade and his pass rush grade, were all above 87. He was the 13th best safety against the run. So he's not necessarily the greatest safety in the world against the run. You could say that is his weak point, but he is still a top half of the league safety when it comes to playing the run. And the thing is that he doesn't just play safety. The Jets moved him all over the place. So for his career, here are his snaps that he has had in the NFL. As an edge rusher, he has played 318 snaps. As a linebacker, he has played 1,099 snaps. At strong safety, he's played 328. At free safety, he has played 868. And that's just neglecting the snaps that he has played, whether it be at corner. I think he played a little bit over 100 snaps at corner this last season, whether it be in the slot or out wide. He's just a versatile player. And Seattle has always liked versatile safeties, especially guys who can play in the box, who can be an extra linebacker, i.e. Cam Chancellor. And you could maybe make an argument that he is better than Cam Chancellor. Or at least you could make the argument that, given longevity and if he keeps up his career at this pace, that he will be better and greater than Cam Chancellor was. Even though Cam Chancellor was an excellent safety and was a late round pick, another gem that Pete found in the draft. So I've seen a lot of people saying that the Jets have won this trade. I don't look at it that way. I think it really depends. Now, is 2 first-round picks and a third and a guy who can be a starting safety in the league, is that maybe a bit too much for a safety? Maybe it is. But at the same, I have always been a person who has believed I would rather have a known commodity who I know can play and play at a high level rather than take the chance of drafting a player and having them possibly bust. Remember, there was the trade rumor that the Browns supposedly offered Seattle, or what was it? No, not the Browns. Seattle offered the Browns Russell Wilson in exchange for their first overall pick because they supposedly liked Baker Mayfield, and the thing was that the Browns turned it down. Now, see, I don't know if I believe that rumor too much, because in my mind, if I have the number 1 overall pick, and someone offers me Russell Wilson, the second best quarterback in the NFL, a guy who is a winner, who can make all the throws, a guy who I know is going to go on the field and instantly make my team better, I would say yes, I'd hang up the phone, and I would start doing whatever paperwork I need to do to get this trade finalized. I would send that pick immediately. I'd send the pick and a box of chocolates, and I'd say, thank you so much, Seattle. Go ahead, take Baker, do whatever it is that you're going to do. Right? But that's just me. I would rather have the known commodity. But people, they always get so caught up in the, oh, look at all the draft picks, look at the haul. They could be a bust. There is always the potential to be a bust. And Seattle desperately needs defensive help because this season wasn't looking good. There has always been a correlation between coverage to pass rush that if the coverage is better, it can help a mediocre pass rush be a bit better and actually get to the quarterback because you're giving them a bit more time to work. At the same time, it can be to the detriment. The worse the defensive line is, it can hurt the secondary. But Jamal Adams is an excellent player. I believe that he can even, by the numbers, he can definitely help them out in the pass rushing area. Let me see. So, since he's entered the league, Jamal Adams has the most sacks, 11, hits, 11, hurries, 27, and total pressures, 49, among all NFL defensive backs since 2017. He is an all-around football player. If I was to do a list, and this is definitely a possibility to do a list like this, if I was to do a top 10 football players in the league right now, and I was like to exclude quarterbacks from that list, Jamal Adams is going to be on that list. And there's a great chance that he would be top 5, top 3 even, because he is insane and he's elite in every sense of the word. And not to mention, I don't want to give away too much of this list because I'm genuinely thinking I might do this list. I think it might be a bit difficult to do. I'm gonna have to do a lot of looking, but I think I could do this. But another player who would most likely be on that list, not most likely, who would definitely be on that list is George Kittle. And he's in the NFC West with the Niners. He is going to get a long-term extension with that team. They're in the works. The last report I saw was that they are nearing a long-term extension. He's going to get a lot of money from that team. He is regarded as either the first or second best tight end, maybe just 1A, 1B with Travis Kelce. It all just kind of depends on if you like your tight end to block. Travis Kelce, not much of a blocker. George Kittle loves to block, and he's great at it. That's not just like he tries to. I mean, he is great at it. Jamal Adams is a safety. He's probably going to be in charge of covering Kittle a lot. I don't know if there's anybody else on Seattle that could cover him. Not even Bobby Wagner. I don't know. I don't think there's anybody else on the team that could really cover George Kittle. And I don't mean that as any shade at Bobby Wagner. I mean that simply I think that George Kittle is an amazing football player. And he's wicked fast. He's wicked strong. And since his rookie year, that dude has been just so damn impressive in the league. He's been ridiculous. He was another late round find. I wish Seattle would have found him. Wish another team would have grabbed him other than the 49ers. But it is what it is. And so I look at this trade that Seattle made with the Jets, and I think to myself, what exactly is it saying? Because teams are always telling you something, right? When the 49ers took the ball out of Jimmy Garoppolo's hands, when the Titans took the ball out of Ryan Tannehill's hands, what they're telling you is that they don't want to throw it. They do not trust their quarterback to make the right throws or to make the right plays or to do what's needed to be done. They would rather run it, a low risk, maybe high reward kind of play. They do not want the quarterback to throw it, right? With the Bears, they bring in Nick Foles. What are they trying to tell you? They do not trust Mitch Trubisky. They don't believe in him. They are going to make him earn his starting role this season. It is no longer going to be gifted to him just because he was a high draft pick. No. No, you're going to go out there and you're going to earn it. Teams are always telling you something by their actions. So, Seattle, when they traded for Jadeveon Clowney, I kind of looked at it and said, well, they traded for him because they don't have another elite pass rusher. I think they had signed Ezekiel Ansah, who did little to nothing his 1 year with Seattle, and he hasn't done much. He had like one spectacular season with Detroit, has kind of tapered off since then. But other than that, I mean, there's Quentin Jefferson, who was a solid D-tackle, a solid interior pass rusher. They let him go because they re-signed Jaron Reed, but they brought in Jadeveon Clowney because they needed that difference maker on defense. And Now Jadeveon Clowney's not there. Could he come back? Maybe. But I don't know. And so then in this offseason, you're kind of looking at Seattle's defense and you're like, okay, so it's Bobby Wagner and a bunch of guys is really what it is. It was Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright and a bunch of dudes. You know, Griffin had his best season last year, but it's not like it's Griffin's defense. It's Bobby Wagner's defense. You know, obviously the team let Frank Clark go to the Chiefs because they couldn't afford him either. And so then they made a trade for Quentin Dunbar, and I think they gave up like a 4th round pick. Seemed like a fleece. Now we're just waiting to see if Dunbar can even play. If he can, excellent. That is exactly what Seattle needed. But then all of a sudden, you have this chance to go and get Jamal Adams. What I think it's trying to tell you is that Pete Carroll can see the flaws in his defense. At least I'm hoping. I'm hoping he sees this. I'm hoping what he sees is that his back end and his front end really need a lot of help. You drafted a young linebacker. You still got Wright and Wagner. Your linebacking core, you could say, is probably taken care of, at least for right now. But then I think another worry of mine would be that he wants to play the same kind of freaking defense he's been playing since he got into the league, right? Single high safety, got one in the box. I'm afraid that is what he's going to do still. I'm afraid he's like, I want to make this defense work. I just need better players. Which is true, of course. Any defense can work, especially if you have great players. Of course, there's always things that can attempt to take advantage of it. But when you have elite players all over the field, any defense can work to an extent. I'm afraid that might be what he's also saying, right? He wants to get another Earl Thomas, Cam Chancellor safety, a guy who can fly all over the field that he can put in the box and put another guy high. I mean that would be a concern of mine, that maybe he doesn't want to go more exotic. He doesn't want to go more to what the NFL is in right now. He wants to stick in his ways. I don't know. I like the trade. Again, I would much rather have a known commodity rather than take my chances drafting a player, especially when my pick is going to be in the 20s, as Seattle's has perpetually been since they drafted Russell Wilson. So I don't have too much of a problem with it. And a lot of people who think the Jets have absolutely won this deal, if Seattle is still good, those picks are going to be in the later rounds. And even then, would Seattle use the picks? I don't think so. I really don't. Just given Seattle's history, I'm not sure they do it. I hope that their drafting picks up. I hope they can get back to getting some good players in these 2nd, 3rd, 4th rounds. But for whatever reason, it hasn't been working out as of recent. So, I don't know. But I like the trade. Basically what I'm saying is I like the trade. Anyways, stay tuned. The final topic of the day. I'm going to give you guys my top 10 head coaches in the NFL right now. Stay tuned. That next.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Final topic of the day. In my last segment, I talked about Seattle's trade with the Jets for Jamal Adams. Overall, I like the trade. I understand there's people out there who think the Jets won it and they fleeced them. I would much rather have a known commodity over a potential commodity in a draft pick. I don't know, but that's just me. Obviously, if Seattle doesn't get to re-sign Jamal Adams and he goes away in free agency, then yes, the Jets won the trade. But assuming that they're going to re-sign him, I'm all for it. I think it's great. Anyways, we're going to get into my top 10 NFL head coaches as it stands currently in the league. This is not based off of this last season. This is based off of the coach's resume. I take into account what they've had to work with, all that stuff. So anyways, we're going to go from 10 to number 1, 10 being the coach that I think is the worst of the 10, down to number 1, who of course, I'm honestly sure most of you can guess who it is that is already probably there, but we're going to go at number 10. So, number 10, I have Kyle Shanahan. When he first got to the 49ers, I thought to myself, okay, alright, so this dude's gonna leave Atlanta after blowing the Super Bowl, and he's gonna now take over with who? And they brought in like Brian Hoyer, I think, to be his quarterback, and it wasn't good. They weren't really winning any games, and then, he gets Jimmy Garoppolo, and he's looking good, finished the season pretty strong, and they won out. Next season he comes in, and he gets hurt, and then it's just losing with CJ Beathard and Nick Mullins, and it seemed like Kyle Shanahan just wasn't really gonna be able to get it done. And then he finally gets Jimmy Garoppolo back, and they go to the Super Bowl in his first season as a full starter. And then he did the exact same thing that he did in Atlanta as an offensive coordinator. See, the thing that you hope is that you learn from your mistakes and you don't repeat them. What Kyle Shanahan did is he did the exact same thing. You had a lead in the second half of the game. Had a lead in the fourth quarter. What was it, 20-10? And he stopped running the football. He actually decided to put the ball in Jimmy Garoppolo's hands. I thought it was ridiculous. You're averaging how many yards per carry? And you're not running the football. How is that possible? You did the same thing in Atlanta, and now you're doing it with the 49ers. I have to dock him for that. And I also have to dock him for the fact that before Jimmy Garoppolo, he couldn't win anything. Look, people give Bill O'Brien a lot of crap, and I understand it, but Bill O'Brien, before he had Deshaun Watson, had a who's who of quarterbacks. He won the division with Brock Osweiler. He won the division with Brian Hoyer. He had everybody there. I know he had Tom Savage, he had him at quarterback. And I know he had some other guys, I just can't think of them off the top of my head. But Bill O'Brien could win his division without Deshaun Watson being his quarterback before he even came into the league. Kyle Shanahan couldn't win games before Jimmy Garoppolo. I have to dock him for that. And his decision making in the Super Bowl, I have to dock him for that. So I have him at number 10. I just want to see more. I want to see more from him. He had one good season. Let me see if he can do it again. At number 9, I have Bruce Arians. Look, he's 65-42 in his career with quarterbacks like Andrew Luck, the limited time he had him in Indianapolis when Chuck Pagano had cancer. And then after that, he had often injured Carson Palmer. He had Drew Stanton, who doesn't have an ACL in one of his legs, the immortal Ryan Lindley, and of course the legendary Blaine Gabbert. If there's one thing that Bruce Arians is all about, he is about throwing the football. He is all about offense. He's a bombs away kind of guy. And on top of that, he is a very, very well-respected, not just coach, but man in the league. And he's done it with a who's who of quarterbacks. I think he had Andrew Luck for about 12 games in Indianapolis. And then after that, Carson Palmer, who's really only had one elite season, and it was the 2015 season when they won the division and Carolina, was obviously on their 15-1 tear that year. But other than that, it's Drew Stanton, Ryan Lindley, Blaine Gabbert that he's had to work with, and yet he's still 65-42 in his career. He took a year away, had to go monitor his own health, now he's back, and you can argue, unless you believe that Andrew Luck is the best quarterback he's ever had in his career, you can argue that Tom Brady is the best quarterback that he has ever had, even at his age. And I'm very interested to see how he works with an absolute elite quarterback, because the last time that he had an elite quarterback in Andrew Luck, he was able to help them get into the playoffs and save their season, and or with Carson Palmer, and what did they go 13-3, and they just had a crusher against Carolina where they got smoked because that team was just on fire. I'm very interested to see what Bruce Arians does this season. At number 8, I have Doug Peterson. Look, Doug Peterson is 38-26 in his career, alright? He wins 60% of his games. Carson Wentz, in his career, has missed 8 games. You know what Doug Peterson is? In those 8 games without Carson Wentz, he's 6-2. In the playoffs, he's been coaching 4 seasons. In his 4 years as the Eagles head coach, he's 4-2 in the playoffs. That was all with Nick Foles, and that included a Super Bowl championship in his second year. He is a former quarterback. He clearly knows how to work with his quarterbacks and tailor an offense around them. I will always tell people, just look at this last season at what he did. They lost all their top receivers, all their top running backs. They were working with, I think their top receiver towards the end of the season was a former quarterback. They had Miles Sanders, who was a rookie, as their starting running back, and they made it to the playoffs and won the frickin' division. And they had to win out. They couldn't lose any more games. They had to win out. If the Cowboys had won one more game, then the Eagles, their chances would have been dashed. But they kept hope. The Cowboys lost everything, and the Eagles were able to win out. Doug Peterson knows what he's doing, and he clearly can work even when there's major injuries to the team. That, and not this last season, but the 2018 Bears, right? Their defense so vaunted. Oh my goodness, how good is this team? They went in there with Nick Foles and beat them. Doug Peterson knows what he's doing. He is an excellent head coach. He is excellent offensively. There is no doubt in my mind Doug Peterson is a top 10 head coach in this league. I understand some people may not want to hear it, but just look at what he's had to work with. Look at all the injuries he's had to deal with. Look at all the injuries to Carson Wentz. He's 6-2 without Carson Wentz. And most people would say, most reasonable people would say that he is way better than Nick Foles. At number 7, I have Pete Carroll. Now, Pete Carroll, I have listed my problems with him, right? He had been fired from 2 places before Seattle. Before he got Russell Wilson, he was below 500. Since he's gotten Russell Wilson, he's the second most winningest coach, I believe, behind Bill Belichick since 2012. So it's kind of that thing of, do you tie the success to Russell Wilson, or do you tie it to Pete Carroll, or are they just a great match? Especially over these last few years, I would tend to give it more to Russell Wilson, because Pete Carroll is more of a old school football guy. I will give the stat again. They play base defense 69% of the time, especially this last season. The next closest was 38 from Arizona. But even with how slow Pete Carroll might be to change, there is no doubt he knows football. He knows more football than I will probably ever know. He's forgotten more football than I have ever known. Since 2012, he has only won less than 10 games one time, and they went 9-7 in that season. And look, you gotta give it to him. He knows defense. This last season was the worst his defense had ever been. Other than that, his defense was consistently in the top 10 or near the top 10. He's a good at football coach. He's great with players. He is a player's coach. Yes, Richard Sherman and some other guys came out and said that his speeches are kind of corny, especially after you've heard them. He has the same stories. They work better with younger players than older players. But you can't deny his record. He wins 60% of his games. He's 11-9 in the playoffs. Not the best in the world, but pretty solid. I just think that he just might be really slow to change. He just seems like he might be stuck in his ways. But Pete Carroll is absolutely a top 10 coach in the league, despite the problems I have with him. At number 6, I have Sean Payton. Now, this might shock some people. Look, his offenses are always elite. If you want to tell me that he is a top 5 offensive mind, if you want to tell me he's a top 3 offensive coordinator, I will go ahead and give you that. I'm not going to argue that. If you want to say he's number 1 above Shanahan and Sean McVay and Andy Reid, I will not debate that with you. I think you're probably right. But the reason why I have him at 6 is because there was a 3-year stretch in which Sean Payton went 7-9. And that does bother me. It bothers me that he has only been to 1 Super Bowl. It's not that he's been to multiple and that he's only won 1. It's that he has literally only been to 1. with Drew Brees as your quarterback. Remember, my knock on Pete Carroll at the moment especially, and I didn't bring it up, I didn't just bring it up, but I'll bring it up now. My other thing I have a problem with Pete Carroll with is that he's been to only 2 Super Bowls with Russell Wilson. They should have won both, but they won one, and they haven't even gotten past the divisional round since their last Super Bowl. They haven't gotten past that. They are perpetually winning wild card games. Pete Carroll can't even get past the divisional round anymore. So that's like why I have him even behind Sean Payton. But when it comes to Sean Payton, look, in his career as a head coach with the Saints, he has won 13 games 4 times. He's won 10-11 4 times. He wins 63% of his games. He's 8-7 in the playoffs. Solid. But I will go back to this. Bill O'Brien, before he got Deshaun Watson, was winning the division with Brock Osweiler and Brian Hoyer. That is who he was winning it with. He was going 9-7 with those guys. Sean Payton went 7-9, 3 straight years with Drew Brees as his quarterback. That is insane. Mike Tomlin last season went 8-8 with Hodges and Rudolph. 7-9 with Drew Brees, 3 straight seasons. That is, I got to dock you for that. I still think he's a great head coach. These last 3 seasons, he's won his division, and they've been trying to make Super Bowl runs here. The referees kind of screwed them over in some of these games. Other games just seems like they kind of got beside themselves, made some mistakes. The Minnesota Miracle was a big mistake. The Rams game was a ref blunder. This last game against the Vikings, they just lost. But I still think that he is a top 10 head coach in the league. John Harbaugh. Look, he has only 1 season below 500, and that is with Joe Flacco being his quarterback the majority of that time. He's transitioned to Lamar Jackson seamlessly, built an offense around him. They completely embraced him. I have always said, these coaches need to work on embracing their quarterback. What's my problem with how Marcus Mariota was handled? Tennessee never embraced him. The Bills with Taylor, they never really embraced him in his play style. But the Ravens and Harbaugh have completely embraced Lamar Jackson. Harbaugh always has really good defenses. He always has really good special teams because he was a special teams coordinator before he was a head coach. Since 2008, he has won 10 or more games 7 times. He wins 62% of his games. And he's been doing all of this in the AFC North with the Pittsburgh Steelers being consistently being a force in that division. There's just no doubt. Harbaugh, he knows how to coach. He is the better of the Harbaugh brothers. That has been established. He is by far and away the better of the Harbaugh brothers. Now, these last 2 trips to the playoffs have not been good. You have the first, not this past season, but the season before Lamar Jackson's rookie year, you lost to the Chargers in an embarrassing fashion. And then this last season, you guys were front runners the whole season with Lamar Jackson running away with the MVP, looking like an absolute superstar. And then you got smacked in the mouth by the Titans. I want to see what happens this coming season. You hope that it goes better for them and that they don't lose again, because that will definitely probably impact my ranking of him being at number 5. But at the moment, I have Harbaugh at number 5. At number 4, I have Mike Tomlin. Now, again, like I said, the Steelers, they are always a force in the AFC North, especially since they got Mike Tomlin. Right, you had a few year stretch where the Bengals were really good, along with the Ravens being really good. The Cleveland Browns have just kind of been bad. They've just been a mess up until recently. Even now, though, there's people who would still claim they are a mess, though their record is much better than it's been. But Mike Tomlin has never been below 8-8, and that is with this last season being what I think might be his greatest masterpiece ever. He went 8-8 with Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph being his quarterbacks. And if you remember, didn't the Steelers start 0-2 this season as well? And that was with Ben Roethlisberger starting the first 2 games of the year. So with Devlin Hodges and Mason Rudolph, what was that? Since then, that means they went 8-6 with those 2. That's great. They almost got into the playoffs with those two quarterbacks. Now, would they have done anything? No, but that would have just been even better. I probably would have moved them up on this list. And he's been doing this with injury-prone Ben Roethlisberger. As I've said on a few different occasions, Ben Roethlisberger has never been a guy that you can say he's going to play all 16 games, especially over the last few seasons. You can basically clock him in to at least miss one or two, and yet Tomlin still wins 65% of his games. Now, the reason why they haven't been to more Super Bowls really is because of the Patriots. They just kept running into the Patriots, and he just hasn't really been able to beat the Patriots, especially in the postseason. Might beat them in the regular season, but when it comes to the postseason, they usually get romped by Belichick and Brady. Now, would they get romped anymore? Probably not. I don't know. Cam Newton, Jarrett Stidham, whoever it's going to be, I have no clue. I don't even know how much longer Ben Roethlisberger is going to play. But Mike Tomlin is absolutely a top 10 coach in this league. I have him at number 4. At number 3, and this is probably going to shock some people, I have Sean McVay. Look, he's 33-15 for a franchise that under Jeff Fisher was completely dead. Do people remember watching Jared Goff his rookie year? Oh my God. The poor guy. He looked terrible. And people had he looked like the ultimate bust. We're talking like Jamarcus Russell level of bust. He didn't look like he could play. And he almost didn't even look like a college quarterback. He looked terrible. But then it turns out, oh no, that was just Jeff Fisher being the worst head coach that there's ever been in the NFL. Living on his laurels of going to one Super Bowl back with the Titans. But, let's go home, let's be honest about Sean McVay. As soon as he got to the NFC West, as soon as he got to the Rams, 11-5 his first season, they won the division. Next year, they went 13-3, won the division again, went to the Super Bowl. Now, it was a very disappointing Super Bowl. It was a snooze fest. Not great. You went from leading the league, 33 points a game in the regular season, to you only scored 3 in the Super Bowl, and your offense for a large part of it just didn't look even remotely the same. Now, part of it was because Todd Gurley wasn't the same either. He obviously has been dealing with his knee issues, arthritis or whatever it is. And then this last season, they went 9-7, and that was with their offensive line being significantly worse. A lot more pressure on Jared Goff. He was the worst quarterback in the league, I believe, beyond his first read. So basically, once his first read wasn't there, it was man overboard. And they were trying to figure out how the hell to manage Todd Gurley because of his injury and everything. They went ahead and they got rid of him. I do believe that the key to their success is going to be keeping Jared Goff upright and making sure that he has the time to throw. But Sean McVay, he fits the NFL in what it is now, pre-stat motion, everything. He's very creative with his play calling. He's a young head coach. He can relate to his players. And I think that Sean McVay is here to stay. Don't let this last season throw you off the wagon of Sean McVay. I think he's excellent, and I think that he will remain excellent. At number 2, I have Andy Reid. Andy Reid hasn't won less than 9 games since 2012. He's won 10 or more games 6 of the last 7 years. His overall record is 207, 128, and 1. He's won 62% of his games. Now, his postseason record isn't the best in the world. It's 15-14, so he's literally a game above 500. But then you kind of look at the quarterbacks that he's had, that he's worked with throughout his career. Donovan McNabb, he really maximized Donovan McNabb. I don't think there's many people who believe that he's a Hall of Famer or anything like that, but he was a dual threat who Andy Reid used beautifully. Then it was Michael Vick. Worked with him for a few seasons, really maximized Michael Vick in the later years of his career. Alex Smith, who I talked about earlier, has been consistently injured. I think that he stayed his healthiest, though, with Andy Reid, but he's been consistently injured. has never been looked at as a top line quarterback, more of just the ultimate game manager, and yet he was able to win a bunch of games with him. Nothing really in the postseason. They had some real postseason blunders actually with Alex Smith, whether it be with the loss to Andrew Luck or the loss to the Titans. So I mean, he's had some bad losses, but he now has Patrick Mahomes, who is arguably the greatest talent that there's ever been in the NFL. If not, it's still Aaron Rodgers. But Patrick Mahomes is right there. And I think that Andy Reid can really add to his legacy with Patrick Mahomes. I believe that they can continue to win because, they always say as long as you have the quarterback, then you can always win something as long as you have that guy. And he is that guy. He can fix everything. He's the force multiplier, and that is 100% what Patrick Mahomes is. I have Andy Reid at number 2, and at number 1, and I'm sure most people aren't surprised by this, but I have Bill Belichick. He is the GOAT of head coaches. Now, I understand there's those out there who would claim that because of the scandals that he is not number 1, and that he simply is disqualified from being number 1, and I cannot fight back on that. I think that is a solid point. There's those who just love the integrity of the game too much, and they will not give it to Bill Belichick, and I will not argue with you on that. But he's won 68% of his games. Since 2003, he hasn't won less than 10 games. Since 2003. He's won 14 games 4 times. That is including a 16-0 season. 6 rings, 9 appearances. His team is always competitive. Now, this season is going to be the test because he doesn't have Tom Brady. He has not had Tom Brady before. Obviously, the Matt Castle year, the year when Tom Brady was suspended for a few games, and he had Jacoby Brissett and Jimmy Garoppolo. But, I mean, Tom Brady is gone from the team, and he is not coming back. So, I'm interested to see Jarrett Stidham or Cam Newton. How does this season work? You no longer have the GOAT of quarterbacks. How do you look? I expect this team to still be competitive. If this team looks terrible and can't even be remotely competitive, then I think that is going to be a huge hit to Bill Belichick's legacy. If all of a sudden this team goes 3-13 without Tom Brady, and they don't even look remotely tough, they don't look remotely like an NFL team, that's only going to hurt Belichick, and that is only going to uplift Tom Brady. Now, of course, it does work vice versa, but Bill Belichick has always catered his system to what his players do well. He has always said he wants his players to do what they do well. He doesn't want you to be something you're not. He wants you to be what you are. And that is something I think more NFL coaches should be embracing. Of course, I'm going to have Bill Belichick at number 1. So to go ahead and retell my list from 10 to 1, Kyle Shanahan, Bruce Arians, Doug Peterson, Pete Carroll, Sean Payton, John Harbaugh, Mike Tomlin, Sean McVay, Andy Reid, and Bill Belichick. Those are my top 10 coaches in the league right now. I know I kind of ripped on Kyle Shanahan during his whole thing. Look, he went to the Super Bowl this last season, so I have to put him in the top 10, especially because he's a genius play caller. But I just think his decision-making so far, especially in the biggest game of the year, has been terrible. And I can't ignore the fact that he couldn't win anything without Jimmy Garoppolo. I can't ignore that. But either way, good show. Covered a lot. I know that there's probably a lot of people who really do not like my list, but the beautiful thing about lists is that it's in the eye of the beholder. Anyways, thank you for listening to the GSMC Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us out. Also, if you can, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.